Have you ever been erased from your own family's story? I sat at the inheritance table waiting to hear my name. Instead, it was my sister's written loud mind gone quiet. The truth, the will had been changed not by my grandfather's wishes, but by those who couldn't wait for him to change his mind. They didn't just take money. They took legacy. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just the one he trusted with a final code, a locked drawer, and a handwritten note that said, Amber is to receive everything. In this video, you'll see how one granddaughter uncovered the truth, reclaimed her place, and turned betrayal into justice. You'll learn how to protect what's rightfully yours, even when everyone around you says to stay quiet. Because this isn't just a story about family and fraud, it's about legacy strategy and the strength to write your name back in permanently. If you've ever felt silenced, this is the video you can't afford to miss. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments. And if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. I parked in the circular driveway engine, still humming, and stared at the old house through the misted windshield. Lakeview Estate hadn't changed. The shutters were still that deep navy blue, the porch still immaculate, the white columns still impossibly tall for a place that was only supposed to house people, not history. But I didn't come back to admire paintwork. I came for answers, maybe even closure. The rain had stopped just minutes before leaving behind a damp, heavy air that clung to my coat as I stepped out and walked toward the double doors. My hand hesitated on the brass handle. Inside, everything would be decided, or maybe everything already had. When I was 12, Grandpa taught me how to play chess at that long oak table in the dining room. He always said, "What's written down only matters if your name stays on it." I thought it was about strategy. But today, I wasn't so sure. The dining room was just as I remembered, grand cold and too symmetrical to feel warm. Crystal glasses sparkled under the antique chandelier. Chairs lined up like soldiers. At the head sat Harper, already laughing with Aunt Judith's glass of champagne in hand, like she hadn't just arrived 5 minutes earlier than me to stage the moment. Of course she got here first. Of course she claimed the seat next to Grandpa. I slid into the seat left for me at the far end, nodding politely at Stanford Green, the family lawyer. He gave a courteous, unreadable smile before glancing at his folder. Everyone quieted. The reading of the will as requested by Mr. Maxwell Kingsley Stanford began. His voice was calm, rehearsed, distant, like this was just another Thursday in probate law. Following the provisions outlined, the personal trust totaling $6 million shall be transferred in full to Harper Elaine Kingsley. No one gasped. No one clapped. Just the quiet sound of a fork slipping off someone's plate and Harper's breath catching before she recomposed. I didn't say anything. I felt Judith's eyes flicker toward me. I felt them all flicker, really small, quick glances checking for cracks. But I gave them nothing. Harper smiled, the kind that practiced itself in the mirror. I guess hard work really does get recognized. She said, her tone light enough to sound innocent, but sharp enough to draw blood. I didn't flinch. That's the thing about growing up with Harper by now. You learn how to bleed without showing it. Grandpa sat at the far end opposite me. He hadn't touched the wine in front of him. He didn't move, didn't react, didn't blink. Just stared at the glass like he was watching something unravel beneath the surface. Dinner was served in silence. Roast lamb artichokes, some sort of truffle reduction, delicately plated hierarchy. Harper's plate was garnished. Mine looked fine. Nothing was overt, but everything was said in how the staff approached, in who got offered seconds, in who got eye contact. I could taste the memory of Sunday lunches here, back when I was still the favorite. Whatever that ever meant. Across the table, Harper leaned toward me, lowering her voice like a confessional. It must be a relief, right? Not having to carry all that responsibility. Grandpa always said you needed more time to figure things out. I met her eyes. Calmly. She waited for a reaction. I gave her none. Judith stirred her coffee twice, but never drank it. My mother commented on the flowers. My father checked his watch. Stanford packed his leather folio and quietly excused himself. I waited for Grandpa to speak. Even a word, even a grunt. But he didn't. Not during dinner, not after. Only when most had filtered out murmuring plans about flights back to Chicago or a weekend in the Hamptons did he finally look at me. Just me, not Harper, not the others. Me. "We'll talk later," he said, his voice hoarse but clear. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a promise. But promises need time to be kept. That night, I watched through the second-floor hallway window as the nurse wheeled him upstairs, slowly, carefully, like he was made of paper. The house fell silent. I stood in the dark hallway, fingers brushing against the frame of a painting I'd grown up ignoring. Some stormy sea, Grandpa once said, reminded him of our family. The estate was still, but my chest was loud. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about the will. It was about the way Grandpa looked at me, like he knew something, like he wasn't done. But by morning, the room at the end of the hall was locked. Staff said he needed rest. Harper said he was processing everything. My parents said nothing at all. And the envelope, the one marked with Harper's name and tied with a ribbon, that one was handed out front in plain sight. No ceremony, no apology. I stood there holding nothing. Just silence. And that buzzing question in my chest that hadn't gone away since Stanford read her name instead of mine. What just happened? The study still smelled like him. Old cedar ink and lemon tea. Everything else in that house had been staged, sanitized, prepared for public performance. But this room had never learned how to lie. It was the one place where silence didn't feel like an accusation. I closed the door quietly behind me. Outside, through the west-facing windows, I could hear laughter echoing across the lawn. My family was pretending brunch fixed everything. I imagined Harper was holding court with her mimosa, dazzling relatives with half-truths and polished charm. Judith's voice floated in and out, a gentle warning bell in the distance. But in here, it was just me. The curtains were drawn halfway, dust caught in the beams of morning light. The desk sat heavy and untouched. Grandpa hadn't used it in months, not since his mobility declined and he moved into the ground-floor bedroom. Still, it felt full. Like he could walk in at any moment and offer me a cup of tea while we dissected the New York Times crossword. I made my way slowly to the desk. The leather chair creaked faintly as I eased into it. My fingers hesitated above the drawers. I remembered his voice from years ago. Calm, firm, and impossibly clear. Only open those if you've got a reason that could stand up in court. At the time, I'd thought he was joking. The first drawer held the expected pens, envelopes, and old deck of playing cards. The second revealed file folders labeled in his precise, cursive, Utility Veterans Affairs Insurance, long-term. Nothing that screamed inheritance. But the third drawer had something different, a thick manila folder labeled in red ink, "Hold until after." I froze. My hands trembled just enough to betray me. I opened it. Empty. No papers, no sticky notes, not even the indentation of something once there. Just the lingering scent of cedar and thyme. Something about that felt deliberate. I scanned the room again, slower this time. The bookshelf behind the desk stretched ceiling-high, mostly law texts, old mysteries, and yellowing almanacs. I remembered helping him dust it one summer. Knowledge hides best in the obvious places he'd told me. I crouched down and ran my hand along the back panel. One book, Chess Strategy and Modern Play, had been pulled out just an inch farther than the others. I slid it out. Behind it was a small notepad, thin, with impressions barely visible on the first page. I tilted it toward the light. My name. Not Harper's. Not some abstract placeholder. My full name in his handwriting, etched faintly from pressure. Amber Wilson is to receive the full trust and property rights to Lakeview Estate. I sat down hard. The page had no ink, just the ghost of something he'd written then discarded. or someone else had discarded for him. In the silence, I heard footsteps, light, calculated. Harper. She didn't knock. She just opened the door halfway and leaned in with that glazed-over smirk she'd perfected since college. Well, if it isn't our resident detective. Snooping already, she cooed. I'm just remembering, I said evenly. She tilted her head. Right. Because Grandpa's desk is so sentimental, isn't it to you I'm not the one who needs a pity prize? Her smile tightened. Enjoy your nostalgia, sis. Just don't get too comfortable. She shut the door without waiting for a reply. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I flipped through more pages of the notepad. Nothing else. Just that single impression like a whisper that didn't want to be forgotten. I tucked it into my tote bag and made a quick copy using the small scanner Grandpa had once used for his archives. I didn't want to take the original, not yet, but I needed proof something had changed. My eyes wandered toward the tall wooden cabinet built into the wall. One door had a keyhole, locked. I tugged once just in case. No give. Near the edge of the shelf, something caught my attention, a tiny object lying beside a leather-bound journal. I picked it up. A pawn. Wooden. Worn. The base had a carved word barely etched. You already know. It was mine. From a game we never finished years ago. I remember slamming the board in frustration and him picking up the piece saying, "You only lose if you walk away before the pattern reveals itself." That was Grandpa. Always about the long game. I pocketed the pawn. Then I sat in the chair letting the silence wrap around me like a blanket I didn't ask for. I wasn't just trying to find money. I was trying to hold on to the only person who ever saw me without blinking. Even now, even gone, I felt like he was watching. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the guest room under a linen sheet that smelled of lavender and distance. Around midnight, I got up for a glass of water and heard voices from down the hall, soft, strained, and too deliberate to be innocent. I stood near the vent at the top of the stairs. The voices floated up from the kitchen below. I told you my mother said her voice sharper than usual. We have to take care of it before he changes his mind again. I already shredded everything, Harper replied, but Amber's sniffing around. Then keep her busy, my father added flatly. We're almost there. Almost where I turned back toward my room, footsteps soundless on the hallway rug, heart hammering a code I couldn't decipher yet. All I knew was something had been taken, and I was going to get it back. I didn't expect him to stand. Grandpa hadn't walked without help in weeks, but that afternoon in a room thick with silence and performance, he rose like he'd never needed permission to speak. The library at Lakeview had always felt too formal to be real. Dark mahogany shelves lined every wall, books standing like jurors. The air was dry-scented faintly with old paper and whatever cologne my father had sprayed too liberally. Everyone was already seated when I arrived. Harper at the head, flanked by our parents, like royalty in exile, their smiles taut and postures rehearsed. Judith sat quietly near the back, close enough to see everything but far enough to avoid being pulled into it. Thank you all for coming. Harper began folding her hands like a news anchor. We thought it would be helpful to clarify some assumptions surrounding the will. Assumptions. That was her word for theft, apparently. She gave a polished smile. There's been some confusion, and it's important we're aligned as a family. I didn't say a word. I just placed the notepad copy on the table in front of me, face up, deliberate. A ghost image of Grandpa's handwriting, barely visible, but undeniable. Amber Wilson is to receive the full trust and property rights to Lakeview Estate. My mother frowned. What's this A note? I said evenly. Press through a missing document. One that seems to have disappeared. From where my father asked. The study, I replied, not giving them more than they deserved. Harper leaned forward. Amber, you're grasping. That's not legal. It's a smudge on a page. You mean like how I was erased from the will, I said. Calmly. I kept my voice level even though my stomach had turned to knots. Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless. Judith tilted slightly in her chair. Her phone was already on her lap, camera pointed subtly upward. "I don't want this to spiral," Harper said, feigning concern. "We've all been under stress. Grandpa made his decision and we need to honor it." That's when I saw him shift. Grandpa sat silently in the corner, wrapped in his usual wool cardigan, a plaid blanket folded across his lap. Until then, he'd seemed half asleep, distant. But when I looked closer, his eyes were open and sharp. He moved the blanket aside. Harper kept talking, besides the lawyer already. Then the cane hit the floor. Everyone turned as Grandpa pressed his hands against the chair arms and rose, slowly, carefully, but with no help. The air dropped 10 degrees. Even Harper froze. He took one step, then another. No one moved to stop him. He reached the center of the room and faced us. His voice, when it came, was low but clear. The truth doesn't need volume. It just needs a moment. I hadn't heard him speak in days. The sound of his voice landed like a verdict. He looked directly at Harper. That version of the will, he said, was not mine. My father's chair creaked. "Dad, let's get you seated. I'm standing," he interrupted. "Don't treat me like I'm already gone." Harper's smile twitched. "We followed your instructions. The attorney read what you signed. I wrote her name," Grandpa said, turning toward me with intention. He paused, letting the sentence breathe. Then they erased it with convenience. You could hear the fire crackle across the room. Nothing else. Judith hit record. My mother finally stood. "Dad, we don't need to confuse anyone. You weren't feeling well that week, and I remember what I wrote," Grandpa said louder now. "I remember why. You didn't want to wait, so you made it tidy." Harper's voice pitched higher. "That's not fair. It wasn't meant to be," he said. "Fairness doesn't live in documents. It lives in who you show up for when no one's looking." He turned again to me. She showed up. I could barely breathe. "I'm not leaving anything else in ink," he continued. They turned signatures into weapons. Harper stepped forward, voice sharp. "You're confused. You told me last fall I told you what you wanted to hear so you'd leave me alone. That shut her up." Then he swayed. Judith was already moving by the time he stumbled. My father reached his side, guiding him gently back into the chair, but he never looked at them. His eyes locked on mine, steady even as his breath caught. "You know what to do." Then he closed his eyes. The room was still as stone. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just felt everything slow down like the second before lightning. 10 minutes later, the paramedics arrived. They wheeled him out quietly, carefully, under dim library chandeliers that hadn't seen this much truth in decades. As I stood near the doorway, stunned but alert, Harper brushed past me. Her whisper landed cold and clean. "If you keep going, you'll lose everything." I turned to face her. I already did. People think betrayal is loud. Screaming, breaking things, running out the front door with a suitcase and mascara-streaked cheeks. But the worst kind, it's quiet. Signed in blue ink behind a closed door, filed away, smoothed over, made to look like love. The last week at Lakeview moved like fog, still slow and dangerous if you weren't paying attention. Everyone acted like the family was fine. Brunches were arranged, gardeners came on schedule, the shutters repainted as if new paint could erase what had been said in that library. But beneath it, the house felt hollowed out, like it had already decided who belonged in it and who didn't. I didn't leave. Not yet. Something in my chest told me I wasn't done. Judith found me that morning in the hallway, standing under the portrait of Grandpa in his navy blazer, the one where he's not smiling, just watching. "He left me a code," she said quietly. "Back when he had his second stroke. Said I should only give it to you if things didn't make sense." The code was 6 numbers and a question mark written on the back of a church program. I knew exactly where it went. We made our way to the old study, locking the door behind us. In the far right corner was Grandpa's personal desk. not the one he used for family finances that was out in the front office. This one had scratches in the wood from when I'd practiced cursive too hard and a hidden compartment beneath the top drawer. The keypad blinked red when I punched in the code. Then it turned green. Inside, 3 things. First, a flash drive labeled, "Simply for her." Judith looked away when I held it. I haven't seen that she said voice thin. Second, a yellowed call log faxed in with timestamps from Harper's number and our father's landline dated 2 months before Grandpa's final hospitalization. Notes in the margins pushed revision urgent, no consent yet. Third, a legal folder with a copy of the will, not the one Harper had paraded around. This one had my name typed out 3 times, once under primary beneficiary, once under healthcare proxy, and once under something called legacy intent clause. I sat down on the floor. Judith crouched beside me, silent. "What does this mean?" I whispered, though I already knew. "That he chose you," she said, "and they didn't." We drove into town that afternoon to the office of Stanford Green. He looked surprised to see us, more surprised when we placed the documents on his desk. He read silently, pausing only once to take off his glasses and rub his temples. Then, this clause was legally binding and deliberately suppressed. I stared at the edge of his desk where the wood curled from years of use. If I move forward, what does that mean? He didn't sugarcoat it. It means this family becomes a legal case. It won't be quiet. Judith cleared her throat. It hasn't been quiet in a long time. I nodded. He told me once, if they can't argue with your voice, they'll try to silence your signature. Stanford inserted the flash drive into his laptop. The screen went black, then blinked to life. A video began to play, grainy, time-stamped but clear. Grandpa sat in his study, that same portrait behind him. If Amber is hearing this, he said, looking directly into the camera, then someone's tried to erase her, and I won't allow it. I didn't breathe. He continued, voice calm but ironclad. She was meant to carry this forward, not because she asked for it, but because she never needed to. Harper. Harper thinks legacy is something you inherit. Amber knows it's something you live. Judith's hand gripped mine. Stanford leaned back slowly, lips pressed thin. We left the office with one final act. I signed the affidavit. Stanford locked the original will into a black evidence case and said, "This goes to court." And that was the moment everything stopped being personal. It became official, documented, filed. But it didn't feel like a victory. Not yet. Outside, the sun had started to dip behind the Lakeview tree-line gold bleeding into blue. The house stood waiting behind us like it knew. Inside me, something quieter had taken hold, not rage, not triumph. Just the steady, anchored sense that I wasn't crazy, that Grandpa saw me, even if they didn't. They called it making things fair. I called it rewriting history, and this time I was the author. Downtown Boston didn't smell like fresh-cut grass or lemon tea. It smelled like asphalt warming under late spring sun, like old coffee and clean concrete. But as I sat in Stanford Green's office flipping through affidavits and timelines, I felt something settle in me that I hadn't felt since Grandpa whispered, "You already know." We were ready. The will, the call logs, the video, the original clause, all neatly cataloged, all admissible. I had no illusions. This wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quiet. But it would be honest. That had to be enough. Stanford looked over the final draft. "Once this goes in, there's no pulling back. Are you ready?" I met his eyes. "I'm not interested in revenge, but I won't let them write me out again." He nodded once. No flourish, no smile, just the weight of someone who'd seen too many truths buried in bureaucracy. Later that afternoon, I sat in the park near the Charles River. Grandpa used to bring me here when I was 7. He'd point out bird sketch benches, teach me how lines build structures. Architecture, he'd said, isn't just buildings. It's choices held in time. I didn't know then how much that sentence would stay with me. Now I held it like armor. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I ignored it. Then a text, "Meet me. Beacon Hill Cafe, 4 p.m. No lawyers." Harper. Part of me wanted to delete it and walk away, but I knew Harper. If she was reaching out directly, it wasn't because she wanted to reconnect, it was because she was afraid. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and compromise. I was halfway through my latte when she slid into the seat across from me, sunglasses still on. Like this was just brunch between sisters. "Amber," she said, voice sweet as syrup, "we don't have to drag this into court." I waited. I'm willing to redistribute a portion, quietly. We could both walk away without turning this into a spectacle. I met her eyes. "You don't get to unsteal." She blinked. "It's not stealing if it's family. It's theft if it erases truth." She leaned back, the mask slipping slightly. "You really think you can win?" "I don't need to win. I just need them to hear what really happened." She scoffed, rising. "Then I hope the courtroom has better lighting than this place. You're going to need every advantage you can get." 2 days later, we gathered for a pre-trial family hearing. Our parents sat stiff, unreadable. Harper played confused. Stanford laid out every detail like glass shards on a white table. Judith's recording, the march clause, the call log, the tape. Harper gasped at the right times, pretended not to know what a signature meant. But Stanford's voice cut through her performance like a scalpel. The truth was overwritten, he said, but not erased. Our mother dabbed her eyes like a mourner. Our father refused to look up. I didn't flinch. That night, Judith and I visited a rundown community center in East Cambridge. The sign was half missing, but the plaque still clung to the bricks. This center exists thanks to a quiet architect, Maxwell Kingsley. He loved this place, Judith said. Volunteered here before we even knew. I nodded. Then let's build something he'd be proud of. We returned to Stanford's office the next morning. "I want to reassign the full amount," I told him. He looked up from his laptop, all of it, into a public grant architecture, scholarships, community projects, restoration efforts, under Grandpa's name. He leaned back. "They'll come after you harder if they feel exposed." I know. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You've already won more than they'll ever understand." We filed the case the next morning. The courtroom wasn't open yet, but the city felt like it was holding its breath. I made a statement to the press, not for drama, but for clarity. "This isn't about revenge," I said, microphones reflecting light like daggers. "It's about remembering the truth. Fully. My grandfather believed in honesty built to last. So do I." The next day, headlines buzzed through the estate like bees through cracked windows. Iris challenges. Sister's $6 windfall in fraud claim. Architect's legacy in legal limbo. Truth versus tradition. Granddaughter files to restore original will. Amber Kingsley, the invisible name, was now in ink, too thick to cross out. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because of clarity. For the first time, I saw the line between survival and legacy, and I wasn't afraid to cross it. I remembered the last chess game Grandpa and I ever played right before his diagnosis. He let me think I had him cornered. Then in 3 moves, he flipped the board. Sometimes he'd said, moving his queen with gentle finality, you let them believe it's their win, long enough to corner the king. Back then, I thought he was teaching me patience. Now I knew he was teaching me strategy. When the press release hit my inbox, filled with everything from support to threats. Some called me brave, others ungrateful. I didn't read most of them. I was too focused on the one thing that mattered, restoring what was lost. Not just the money, not even the name, but the truth, the quiet kind, the kind that holds. I wrote the mission statement myself for the Maxwell Kingsley Legacy Fund, to build spaces that protect the forgotten, to support architecture that includes the unseen, and to remind this world design is not just concrete, it's conscience. When Judith read it, her voice cracked. He would have cried. I almost did, I admitted. Outside the courthouse, a reporter asked, "What happens if you lose?" I paused, then I lose out loud, but they won't win quietly. This was never just about the $6 million. It was about who they thought deserved to be written in and who they thought wouldn't fight when erased. They were wrong. They took my name off a document. I wrote it back into something that'll last. The courtroom smelled like wood polish and stale arguments. The judge's voice rang clear, formal, final. We rule in favor of the petitioner. The original, will dated March 12th, stands as legally binding. Harper didn't flinch. She had mastered the art of performance by now, hands folded, mouth tight, eyes empty. Our parents didn't even show. Stanford nodded once beside me, subtle and steady as always. Judith squeezed my hand. I wasn't sure if I was trembling or finally still. We didn't celebrate with champagne. We signed papers, filed motions, notified nonprofit partners. There was no music, just momentum. A week later, I was in Lowell, Massachusetts, where Grandpa once told me cities were concrete canvases with buried hope. We stood outside the newly completed East Side Community Learning Center. A white banner hung across the gates, the Amber Maxwell Legacy Initiative. The dedication was simple. Local students sat cross-legged in the grass, architecture mentors stood off to the side, and a nonprofit leader adjusted a mic stand as if it were too heavy for something so ceremonial. I hadn't planned to speak, but when the crowd quieted and Judith handed me the folded letter with Grandpa's handwriting on the back, something shifted. Before I say anything, I said, holding up the envelope, I want to read something I didn't know I still had. The paper was aged. The ink faded, but I heard his voice in every line. They can take the gold, the house, even the title. But not who you are. That's mine, and now it's yours. Make it something they can't erase. The wind moved gently through the trees. No applause, just breath, real breath. Harper showed up late. She stood off to the side in a beige coat that didn't match the heat. When the crowd dispersed and the plaque was unveiled, designed by underrepresented youth, funded by the Maxwell Trust, she approached me with a familiar smirk. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "That's new." She exhaled, measured. "Can we at least keep Mom and Dad's name on the donor wall?" They didn't know how bad it got. They were just silent, I interrupted. That was the choice they made. "You can't erase them," she argued. I'm just not honoring them for damage they caused." Her smile cracked. "You really think this makes you better?" "No," I said. "Just free." She didn't say goodbye. She turned and walked down the stairs, and for the first time, I didn't watch her go. I turned back toward the front entrance. Inside the lobby, encased in glass beside the donor registry, was Grandpa's favorite chess piece, his Black Queen, the one he used in every game with me. On its wooden base was a small plaque you already know. That night, I gave a talk to the scholarship cohort first-generation students, some barely 18. They didn't know the whole story, but they knew this was for them. Your name doesn't have to be famous, I told them. It just has to be yours. And you don't have to fight loud, you just have to last. They nodded. Some smiled. One asked me to sign their application form with the same pen I used in court. Judith teared up again. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said, my voice catching slightly. "He did. I just made sure they couldn't undo it." The sun dipped behind the red brick buildings. Warm light spilled across the courtyard. Cameras clicked, but I wasn't posing. I stood with them, with the students, the volunteers, the ones building forward. I didn't win a throne. I built a table. And this time, my name wasn't written in pencil. It was carved. I never imagined that old chessboard would be where everything began, and where I'd finally understand that a true legacy isn't what we leave in a will, but what we leave in others. In families, silence can hurt more than words. But when we stand up for what's right, even if we stand alone, love finds its way back. Titles can be handed out, but self-worth. That's something you have to hold on to yourself. If this story reminded you of someone or something that once mattered, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes writing your name back in starts with just a sentence.